Welcome back for another deep dive. This time, we're going to be looking at something that I think a lot of us have thought about at least a little bit: luxury apartments,
Yeah, it's definitely a topic that captures the imagination, right?
for sure. And the source material you sent me for this one was super interesting.
Oh, yeah.
It was an excerpt from an academic paper called "Infrastructures in Everyday Life: The Luxury Apartment."
Mm.
But honestly, it read more like a personal memoir,
Mm.
full of like these really vivid details.
Well, the author does take us on their personal journey from starting in a small townhouse to then building their own mansion to finally living in a series of luxury apartments.
Exactly. So we're going to use that journey as a jumping off point to really explore the world of luxury apartments, and not just as places to live, but as these like windows into
I would
society.
like that. Windows into society.
Right.
Mm.
Because, yeah, some people have incredibly nice homes. We get it.
Yeah.
But I think we can go deeper than that. We can explore how luxury apartments as a type of infrastructure, shape community behavior, even our perception of time.
I think that's a really important point because when we talk about infrastructure, we often think about the physical stuff, the buildings, the roads, the bridges. But infrastructure is so much more than that. It's also about the systems, the rules, the social norms that shape how we live our lives.
And the author really highlights that in their
Mhm.
story, right? They talk about moving to this high-rise apartment in China, and they had this view where they were literally looking down on others, like physically looking down on people living in less developed housing just down the street.
Yeah, and that visual really stuck with me too, because it highlights that spatial dynamic that exists in so many cities. You have these wealthy areas that are often literally elevated above the less affluent ones.
Right. It makes you think about like how much our physical environment shapes our perceptions and even our behaviors.
Absolutely. And it's not just about the physical environment either. It's about the whole network of systems that support those environments. Things like property laws, zoning regulations, even the history of how cities develop over time.
Speaking of history, the author mentions a friend of theirs from Sirwan whose family got government compensation to move from a reconstruction zone,
Hmm.
and now they're like wealthy enough to never work again.
Wow.
Yeah, it really makes you think about how infrastructure can have this like ripple effect across time, doesn't it? Like
Yeah.
new developments replacing old ones, and that can lead to shifts in wealth, power dynamics, all of that.
It's something we often refer to as gentrification, right? Where neighborhoods change over time,
Hmm.
often displacing the original residents.
And that brings us to the lifestyle within these luxury apartments. I
Yeah.
mean, the author describes a world of like gyms, pools, saunas, even movie theaters, all within their building.
Oh, yeah. It's like a self-contained universe.
Right, like this contained, exclusive community, almost like I don't know, a private club or something.
Like a mini city within a city with all the amenities you could ever want right at your fingertips.
Right. And the author's mother is a great example of this. Like all of her social activities happen within the building. It's wild.
Yeah, it shows how these spaces can foster a sense of not just physical separation, but social and cultural separation as well.
It's fascinating, but it also makes you wonder about the cost of all this.
Right, because all of this luxury comes at a price, literally.
Yeah, I mean, the author mentions paying quarterly maintenance fees of $1,000 for one building and a whopping $3,800 for another.
It's almost like a membership fee to this exclusive lifestyle. And those fees, they're what keep the whole infrastructure running. They maintain the amenities, the staff, the exclusivity.
Speaking of exclusivity, the author makes this observation about how you can spot luxury apartments from an airplane.
Really?
Yeah, like they're these beacons of wealth, visible even from above.
Yeah.
But then the author also talks about their own preference for wearing casual clothes in the complex's, public spaces.
Wow.
Yeah, it's like this, almost like a subtle rebellion against the expected norms, wouldn't you say?
Interesting. I hadn't thought about it that way, but it makes sense. Like they're trying to assert their individuality within this very um, meticulously crafted environment.
Yeah, and it makes me wonder, like, how much of luxury living is about uh, outward appearances versus, the actual lived experience.
Right. It's like, are you buying into a lifestyle or are you creating your own?
And the author's mother actually scolds them for looking too messy,
Yeah.
which, highlights those social pressures that come with inhabiting these spaces. It's not just about having the money to live there. It's about fitting in, you know, conforming to a certain image.
It's like there's this unspoken code of conduct, right? Like you're expected to present yourself in a certain way.
Exactly. And I was struck by this other observation from the author. When a luxury apartment is sold below its expected price, it becomes news.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, why is that, right? Like,
Yeah.
why is it news?
I think it's because it disrupts our understanding of the system. Like it cracks the facade of this seemingly perfect world, exposing the underlying mechanics.
It's like this glitch in the matrix, right? A sudden deviation from the carefully curated image. Makes you wonder how stable these systems really are.
Right, because it shows that even the most exclusive, most luxurious spaces are still subject to the same forces of supply and demand, the same economic realities that affect the rest of us.
Exactly. So we've got these luxurious spaces designed for visibility but inhabited in private. We've got these social circles with their own like intricate rules. And we've got this constant tension between individual expression and, the pressure to conform.
So where does that leave us? What's the takeaway here?
It's a good question. And I think it leads us to an even bigger question.
Yeah.
Are luxury apartments ultimately more about maintaining a certain image than experiencing true freedom?
That's a deep question, and it's one that I think we'll continue to explore as we dive deeper into this source material.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a tough one, and I don't think the source is trying to tell us what to think, but it definitely like makes you think about all this like fancy gatherings the author describes, like dinner parties with live music, rooftop get-togethers, private trainers, all happening, inside the building.
It's true. It really does paint this picture of a world unto itself.
Yeah.
Like a mini city or something.
But like a super privileged mini city.
Right, exactly.
Like a community within a community. And then even within that, you have all these like smaller social circles, each with their own, unwritten rules and expectations.
Yeah, the author uses this interesting word torqued to describe how they felt about, the expectations of how to behave in this complex. Like they were constantly aware of needing to present a certain image.
Yeah, that really jumped out at me too. Like they talk about this tension between their own personal style, which is more casual, and the more, I guess, polished look that's, expected of residents.
Right. It makes you wonder, like, what's the psychological impact of living in such I don't know, a meticulously crafted environment?
Does it like foster freedom or does it actually lead to, conformity?
It's a good question. And it makes me think about the author's observation about how luxury apartments are practically invisible from street level.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Like you don't see the people coming and going or get a sense of, what their daily lives are like.
It's true. It's like this hidden world operating behind this veil of exclusivity.
The author even says that while the buildings themselves might be these like architectural marvels, the lives of the people inside are often hidden.
It's kind of a paradox, isn't it? Like luxury apartments are designed to be seen and admired from afar, but the actual living that happens inside is often very private, very secluded.
Right. And then even within the complex, that there are these hierarchies, these subtle power dynamics. The author mentions seeing someone walking into like a luxury boutique who didn't look the part,
Hmm.
but they were actually super wealthy. It's like it challenges our assumptions about how status is, displayed and perceived.
It's so true. Appearances can be deceiving, right? And true wealth often operates in these very subtle, understated ways.
So we've got these luxurious spaces designed for visibility but inhabited in private. We've got these social circles with their own intricate rules and expectations. And we've got this tension between individual expression and the pressure to conform.
It's a lot to unpack, and I think it points to a bigger question.
Go on.
Okay, so if luxury apartments are like a microcosm of society, what does that tell us about our values or priorities? Are we becoming more and more focused on things like exclusivity, status, material possessions?
Whoa. Yeah, that's a deep dive.
It is, and the source is really pushing us to think about these things, to look beyond the shiny facades, to really grapple with the complexities and contradictions of this very specific type of infrastructure.
So it's like, why should we care?
Yeah.
Why should we care about the inner workings of luxury apartments if we don't actually live in one?
Because as we've been talking about, they're not just these isolated bubbles of wealth, right? They reflect these broader social and economic forces. And those forces, they impact all of us.
So these trends, income inequality, housing policies, cultural values, those are all tied up in this.
Exactly. They all contribute to how these luxury apartments are developed and how they function, and they have these ripple effects that spread throughout our
It's
communities.
like they're a microcosm of the systems that shape our lives. Right.
Precisely. So by understanding, how this particular infrastructure works, we can actually gain a deeper understanding of the forces that are shaping our world, both the good and the bad.
Okay. Yeah. Wow. I'm definitely seeing things in a new light after this deep dive.
Me too. It's amazing how something that seems as simple as a home can actually be this really potent symbol, a symbol of so much more.
Right. It's like holding up a mirror to society,
Hmm.
revealing both the beauty and the flaws.
Yeah.
And it makes me wonder, like, how do we balance that desire for comfort and security with the need for authenticity, for connection?
That's the question, isn't it?
Yeah. And the source really encourages us to uh, think about our own values.
Mm.
What are we willing to compromise on?
Mm.
And what are our non-negotiables?
Those are important questions, and there's no easy answer.
Definitely not. And speaking of questions to ponder, I have one final thought for our listeners, inspired by the source, but not directly addressed in it.
Okay, I'm listening.
So if pursuing material comfort can sometimes come at the cost of, freedom or authenticity, like the author experienced,
Hmm.
how do we find that balance? What are we willing to sacrifice, and what are we absolutely not willing to give up?
That's a profound question. And it's one that each of us has to wrestle with on our own, I think.
Yeah, and it makes me think about how we're all like navigating this web of, infrastructures,
Yeah.
from the physical structures of our cities to the, social structures.
Yeah, and those infrastructures, they're always evolving. They're never really static.
Right. They shape us and we shape them, which I guess brings us back to the author and how they felt, torqued by the expectations of their luxury apartment complex.
It's true. Like the building itself almost like starts to push you towards certain behaviors.
Totally. So at what point does like the pursuit of comfort and exclusivity start to feel like, I don't know, a gilded cage?
Right. Like how much do you give up to get all those amenities and that, sense of status?
And then the author also points out that even like the breakdowns in this infrastructure can be revealing. They mention how when a luxury apartment is sold for less than its expected price, it becomes news.
It's like this crack in the facade. Suddenly the illusion of perfection is gone.
Shattered. And it reminds us that all these systems, no matter how stable or permanent they seem, are actually pretty fragile.
Yeah, for sure. They depend on all these different social and economic factors that can change at any time.
So to bring this back to our listeners, why should we care about, how luxury apartments work if we don't live in one?
Because they're not just these isolated little bubbles of wealth. Like we've been saying, they reflect bigger trends that affect us all.
So things like income inequality, housing policies, cultural values, those all play a role.
Exactly. They all shape how these luxury apartments are developed and how they function, and those effects ripple out into our communities.
It's like looking at a microcosm of the larger systems that shape our lives,
Precisely. By understanding how this one specific infrastructure works, we can start to see the forces that are shaping our world, the good and the bad.
Well, this deep dive has definitely given me a whole new way of thinking about luxury apartments. They're not just buildings, they're like stories.
Right. Stories about power, about status, about aspiration.
And about, I think, the complex relationship between, our individual choices and the systems that surround us.
Maybe there are also stories about our search for belonging, for meaning, for a place to call home, even if that home comes with, a big price tag and a whole set of rules.
That's a great way to put it. And with that, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive. But before we go, I want to leave you with one last thought to ponder. If, as the author suggests, striving for material comfort can sometimes come at the cost of freedom or authenticity, how do we find that balance in our own lives? What are we willing to compromise? What are our non-negotiables?
Those are some big questions. And I think ultimately, each of us has to find our own answers. We all have to navigate these infrastructures in our own way, making choices that shape not just our own lives, but the world around us.
Well said. And on that note, thanks for joining us for another deep dive.